happens, that is new, that affects people, that interests people, is news. Mike Allen is back on his paper route after a short vacation. While he was away visiting his cousin, Mike's letters home were welcome and interesting news for his family. And Mike even livened up his news with photographs.
Crossed over the stream on these little stepping stones, Tom slipped and fell in up to his waist. But he didn't hurt himself. But then Tom had to go home to change his wet clothes. We all thought it was very funny. But Aunt Minnie was kind of mad. Muffin's new kitten...
For them, this would not qualify as news. The papers Mike delivers contain a different kind of news for a different kind of family. Just as Mike's family wanted news of everything happening to Mike, the members of Mike's city are interested in what happened in their community and their world, as if they were members of one big family, and this, their family news. Here, for example, is a story of interest to people over the city. A local story that may involve their friends and neighbors. How did this story find its way into the paper? This is the newsroom of a big city newspaper. Here we find the people who gather the news, who write the news, and who plan and direct the way it will be handled. An editor must decide what news a reporter will go after and how much of the story will be printed in the paper. But how can he know what is going to happen and when? Many events that will become news are scheduled in advance. An astronaut will talk about space. A singing group will perform in the stadium. A bus strike is called for that day. The editor knows what reporter is best qualified to cover each type of story. As he makes the assignment, he is able to give the reporter some idea of the importance of his story to the newspaper. But all news is not scheduled in advance. The reporters who occupy these desks are out making the rounds of places where they might find news. Places like City Hall, the courts, schools, police headquarters. Looking over the police records since he was last there, the police reporter finds many things that happened in the last few hours, some big, some small. For example, he learns that police were called when someone heard noises in her yard. But all the police found was an overturned garbage can. Talking to policemen and later to the police captain, he learns about several other incidents that happened during the night, including one of a man who fell into the river and of a policeman who dived into the dark, chilly water to rescue him. In a special press room at police headquarters, the reporter may work over his material and phone in urgent stories. Police teletype machines bring him the same information going to and from the different precinct stations, and a police radio receiver brings him all the police calls. A reporter must decide what news his editor will consider important enough to print. Will he want to print a story about an overturned garbage can? Hardly. About a midnight rescue from drowning? Certainly.
Attention all cars. Be on the lookout for a taxi, dark in color. Driver described as elderly. Transported a man and child to General Hospital yesterday from 5th and Randolph about 4 p.m. Driver should contact the health department. May be carrying a contagious disease.
Already the reporter is on the phone to get additional information on the call he just heard. Then he phones his editor. The editor must decide what to do about this news lead. He must decide how important it is as news, whether the police reporter or someone else should follow up on the story. He turns the police reporter over to a rewrite man to get out an immediate short item for the first edition. A longer, more complete story will be prepared for later editions as more information becomes available. Reporters do not always write their own stories. In this case, it's a matter of time. Rewrite men are skilled news writers, and they can quickly turn the bare facts they get from reporters into interesting and informative stories. Meanwhile, the editor has decided to have the paper's science and medical reporter follow up the story. Newspapers have many specialists who know a great deal about special fields and are able to cover news about them with greater understanding. Things like politics, sports, art, science, and many others. A reporter can often learn the facts by telephone without leaving the newsroom. He has contacts in many places, and he knows whom to call for the information he needs. He calls the health department, the police, the hospital, and soon he is well on the track of the story.
Mr. Brady.
Yes, Jack.
This looks as if it may be pretty big. Smallpox. This missionary just returned from Africa with what appears to be a case of smallpox, and he's been in a hospital now. They're now trying to find all the people who have come in contact with him since his return, isolate him.
Jack, I think you'd better get down to the health department and see what else you can find.
Smallpox, a highly contagious disease almost unknown in the United States since the advent of vaccination. At the Department of Health, a command post has been set up to conduct the manhunt. The reporter learns that the names they have of people with whom the missionary had contact now number in the hundreds and may go into the thousands, all to be found and vaccinated. Public health nurses are visiting the homes of suspected people. Taxis operating in the area where the missionary had been picked up are being checked by police in hopes of finding the missing driver. At least one contact is known to be traveling in another state, and police there are on the lookout for him. Even worse, the passenger list of the airplane in which the missionary had traveled contains people scattered all over the country who must be found. This is no longer a local story. People all over the country will be interested in what is happening here, and parts of this news story will go to and come from places half around the world. A tape punched with holes by a teletypist sends electrical impulses to teletype machines in every state and abroad. And the same story is typed automatically in Boston and Los Angeles and Toronto at the same moment. Newspapers get most of their news from other cities and from around the world, from news-gathering wire services. And in turn, supply some of these services with news gathered locally by their reporters. Even photographs are sent by wire. This photograph is being received at the same time by 800 news outlets all over the country. Wire services also supply news to radio and television stations. Their newsrooms look very much like those of newspapers. The staff of this station is covering the smallpox story too. In fact, they have a police radio receiver right there.
Scout 57, check on Harry Murdo, 1701 Elm Street. This man is reported as possible cab driver being sought for vaccination in smallpox case.
Scout 57 is 10-4.
But Dr. Grant, has it been established definitely that Mr. Fisher has smallpox?
Well, this has been a difficult case to diagnose. It certainly is not a typical case. Preliminary lab tests show that it probably is smallpox. We can't, however, wait for final lab tests. A smallpox outbreak, should it occur, could have a death rate as high as 30%. We cannot afford to take chances of this kind.
Radio reporters are able to bring their news audience the actual sounds of those who make the news.
Yes, and in addition, with the children back in school today after their 3-day holiday, there will be a mass vaccination program carried out at the Harwell School this afternoon for all children who have not previously been vaccinated within the past 5 years. This, of course, is the school attended by the children of Mr. Fisher.
In a report from Africa, the Minister of Health of Ghana stated that while there are known to be cases of smallpox in some rural areas of that country, there are no known cases in Accra, where missionary Fisher spent his last month before embarking for the United States. On the labor front, the expected strike of transportation workers has failed to materialize, as both sides...
Radio news broadcasts are made often throughout the day. Radio news is generally brief. Only the most important news stories are usually broadcast, and not much more of these than would be found in the headlines of a newspaper. While most people get their newspapers only once a day,
at the
Radio can
intersection
bring
of
its
State Route
listeners
47
news
and
as it
211.
is received.
Miraculously, all 4 children riding in the back seat were unhurt. Here's late word on that smallpox case. Massachusetts State Patrolmen picked up vacationing Marvin Wells about an hour ago, and they have escorted him to Plymouth Hospital where he was vaccinated. This reduces to 7 the number of primary contacts still to be found. Several hundred secondary contacts still remain. A stagnant air mass trapped a blanket of smog on New York City today.
The TV news editor keeps his eye on news as it develops. Like the newspaper and radio editors, he must decide what news his staff will cover. He has the special problem of deciding what can and should be filmed. He calls a reporter and cameraman as they return from another assignment and sends them to cover the school vaccination, a new aspect in the continuing smallpox story the public will be interested in seeing. While the reporter talks to some of the children to help give him material he can use for an interesting story later on the air, the cameraman films the things that can be seen happening. Through motion pictures and videotape, and sometimes remote live telecasts, TV is able to make its news audience eyewitness to many events. In the control room, technicians select what goes out over the air from the different views provided by cameras in the studio and from film and videotape projectors.
This morning, the last of the primary contacts being sought for smallpox inoculation was found when taxi driver James Martin reported to the Department of Health and was vaccinated. Mr. Martin revealed he was aware of the search being conducted for him, but that he was afraid to come in for fear of losing his job over his failure to report the fare. Meanwhile, as the health department closed in on the remaining secondary contacts, a mass inoculation brought additional protection to 212 children at the Harwell School, where all classmates of the Fisher children who had not been vaccinated within the past 5 years were revaccinated today. For maximum effect, the health department said it hoped to reach and immunize all contacts by tomorrow evening.
In addition to keeping the public informed, the spreading of news in this case is having another effect. People who think they may have had some contact with Mr. Fisher are calling the health department and arranging for immunization. The newspaper reporter, meanwhile, makes his daily visits to the health department command post and gets the latest developments in the smallpox story.
At the Department of Health today, 1,014 persons had been vaccinated out of the 1,015 sought when the news came in this afternoon.
While the first lab test showed Mr. Fisher to have smallpox, additional tests were made at the U.S. Public Health Service to establish a definite diagnosis. It is these latter tests that finally showed that the first diagnosis was in error and that Mr. Fisher is recovering from the milder and far less contagious disease of chickenpox. District Health Director Grant stated that if the same kind of case occurred again, the same steps would be taken as in this case. We simply could not take a chance that it was smallpox, he said. On the international scene,
the danger is over. And in minutes, millions are learning about it, just as they learn about every important and interesting event in our community, all over the country, and around the world. Newspaper, radio, and TV reporters are, in a way, our eyes and ears, witnessing for us, finding out for us, bringing us close up to the 1,000,001 happenings we want to know about. Reporting the news is a vast and complex process involving hundreds of news companies and tens of thousands of people. In his small way, Mike plays a part in that operation.